Hi all, I have another fascinating and instructive neural network game. Stoofvlees is playing against Komodo, and this is in TCEC Season 19, Premier Division. I feel I'm learning a lot from Stoofvlees, a little bit about other things that you don't get from Leela. Whilst Leela I credit a lot with form pawn strategy, I credit Stoofvlees with the bishop without the counterpart. But also I think there's a new string to the bow here that we're going to see in this game, which is the refusal to kind of weaken a colour complex which might favour one of the opponent's bishops. So the refusal to give in, to have to create weaknesses, is demonstrated in this particular game as well. And they both come together to create for me a remarkable symphony on the board in the end, on both sides of the board. It's like Stoofvlees is a conductor to me. It's made a vivid impression, and I let it stew like beef stew. I let this game stew in my mind for a few days, actually, quite a few days. And I've revisited it with concrete analysis today, and I find it absolutely fascinating for some extra stuff I didn't even realise before. Mysterious rook moves. So it's got a lot of exciting ingredients, this particular beef stew game. So e4 from Stoofvlees, c5 we have as a sit-in defence. The Komodo engine is playing with the black pieces, just to clarify, and this is the accelerated fianchetto system. So black is accelerating the fianchetto bishop without playing knight f6. So quite fast pressure on d4, which needs to be handled now. The knight's protected. Queen b6, kind of annoying. Knight b3, shielding b2, hitting the queen. Check. Bishop d2. This is, after queen b6, this is the end of the book. Stoofvlees plays knight c3. We have d6. Bishop e2, knight f6. White castles, queen d8, bishop e3. Black castles, and now here, checking with ChessBase online database, the move Stoofvlees plays in this position seems to be a theoretical novelty. It's a remarkably mysterious rook move. I'm pretty sure it must have been played in online chess, though, thousands of games. I'm talking about master level chess. It seems in this position, players with white usually commit to playing f3. And I know, especially from my opening tango course, that if you want a dark square provocation strategy, it's usually good to encourage your opponent's pawns to be on light squares. So the usual move most serious players play in this position is f3, which of course deprives black the use of the g4 square. But it does come at the cost of a micro downside. It is potentially amplifying the dark square weaknesses that white has with this structure, potentially. And we don't get Stoofvlees to play f3. It absolutely point blank refuses. And there's other moves as well being played in this position, but apparently not this next move, which is rook e1. And things get even more mysterious after this. So this is a novelty move as far as I can tell. Black plays here bishop e6. And now we have knight d4, and quite a unique game is emerging here. Black plays rook c8, and I've sometimes thought, oh, this might be worth it, giving up the light square bishop, because it doesn't seem to be comfortable in this pawn chain against the Maroczy bind, so why not just give it up? Have some f-file, fun, have a nice extra bit of bind on the d4 square, and you're removing one of white's annoying knights, which often form part of the Maroczy bind torture session. So it seems like a kind of a dynamic move. If, for example, knight takes, so knight d4, rook c8. If knight takes d4 was played here instead of rook c8, this position, white potentially, and bishop f1, white still hasn't played f3. So white is actually more solid on the dark squares without that f3. And we're talking little details here now. if white doesn't really need to tactically deprive the g4 square with f3, it seems like a blunt instrument to use f3 to take away g4 from black. But it also can be achieved here with h3 anyway, if white needs, and a3, and white's got that queenside pawn majority to play with. And this position, white should have actually a big advantage, not just a slight advantage, a big advantage. So h3 is actually preferable to f3 because the king's on that diagonal anyway. It's not just a weakening of the dark squares. There's bonus points for the king being on this diagonal. This is in a theoretical sense. So white does seem to be standing well here. So whatever the reasoning was, whatever the concrete analysis, rook c8 was played, allowing the bishop to be taken. And I'm a huge fan, you know, of Stoofvlees when it has the bishop without the counterpart. So it grabs that bishop. It's got the bishop without the counterpart. And you might think, well, this bishop's going to be pathetic, isn't it, soon? Because black's going to play e5 and the bishop's behind its own pawns. Is it, though? But first, we have another remarkably mysterious rook move, which is rook f1. Rook f1. So rook e1 was a super innovation, but rook f1 is just ridiculous, isn't it? You could probably tell this is now an endgame game. No human in their right mind would have this level of patience. One thing to point out philosophically here, it's good that as humans we celebrate, you know, we have this tendency to become aware of the importance of being careful with pawn moves. So we're careful with irreversible decisions, which take the form in chess of pawn moves that are irreversible by the current rule set. But also this is the other side of the coin. Isn't this a celebration of reversibility? And in fact, if you Stockfish 12 agrees this is the best move, the computers, they celebrate a lot more than us humans the reversibility aspects of rook moves. You know, maybe they could play these rook moves all the time and not touch f3. I think it maybe, you know, sometimes it's laziness we play f3. I've been watching a lot of Karpov games. I end up playing f3. I wonder why things go wrong tactically later. It's often on dark squares. Root cause analysis is quite often, maybe we carry more dark square weaknesses than we needed to commit to. The celebration of reversibility here from the TN move, you know, innovation move rook e1 to rook f1 is remarkable in its own right. And you think now, well, nothing beautiful is going to happen in this game, right? If you did play f3, you know, it actually really damages white's advantages in a technical sense. Black plays knight d7, and it's only a small edge now, not a clear advantage, which it is actually after rook f1. And yeah, these are too invisible to see as humans, probably, these advantages. But we get an intuitive sense that, you know, if we have a pawn on f3, it's slightly worse, right? In an intuitive sense. So e5 is played, and black is weakening light squares in a corresponding fashion here, though. Black is giving in on the light squares. We have king h1, a6, which does actually weaken the dark squares as well. Okay, it reduces the responsibility of the knight. It takes a target away from the bishop. Queen d2, we see now e6, and it's here and now that with the queen maybe potentially coming to h4 in some variations and the knight potentially coming to g4, that the move f3 is justified, at least to Stoofvlees. Finally, something justifies it. And you might wonder, like me, well, what finally justified f3? If we look at rook fd1 here as an example, knight d4, if bishop takes, this is a terrible idea because of knight g4 hitting the queen, but this is just emphasizing that the whole diagonal, it's a disaster. So there's no mystery there. Okay, the absence of f3 can lead to pain as well. In this position, as an example as well, if bishop f1, then yes, the absence of f3 is a bit of a pain after knight g4. And things are horrible after queen h4. So the queen's coming in, facilitated by that e6 earlier. And queen h5, for example, this is just really vicious. For example, knight takes, bishop h6, and white's in a world of pain after rook f3. Horrible things are happening now. And if this is the best move, yeah, it's a disaster for white. So there is a justification finally for this move f3. Okay, so knight d4 is played now, and we have bishop d3. If the bishop takes, it's actually not that bad. Knight takes h2, but it's not that good either. Knight takes h2 will guarantee black a draw here tactically on the dark squares actually after bishop e5. So that threatens a classic mating pattern. If you haven't seen it before, I'll just show you. Check. And then you go here to cut off the escape square of the king. So that limits severely white's options. So after the check here, bishop e5, if rook fd1, then check. And here it's a perpetual check. And if you might ask, well, why doesn't white play f4 in that situation instead of the rook move? This is just bad after rook takes. And here there's queen h2 and rook f8. It's pretty nasty stuff. Black has a small advantage there, but can even do even better after f4. Let's review that again. Here, instead of queen h2, there's actually a crushing move alternative. It's very tempting to put the king on the f file, but believe it or not, there's an even more effective move. I wonder if you can guess if I give you 5 seconds. Black to play here. Okay, G5, not queen h2, G5. This is even stronger because of the G4 possibility, and this is just, yeah, it's crushing. It's going to be like winning lots of material or winning the queen, for example, like this. Yeah, there are lots of ways to win material and stuff. Horrible things going wrong. So anyway, it looks like a bad idea to play bishop takes d4, and it is. So we see bishop d3 for the moment. White is going to work its way to undermine that knight now with the e2 square vacated. So here, using that newly vacated e2 square, knight e2. b3 that allows, you know, knight f4, and this could be quite a pleasant installation for black, justifying these two central pawns, doubled central pawns. So knight e2 immediately challenging things. So we see queen f6. If knight takes e2 here, bishop takes, this situation, it turns out the d pawn is in big trouble. And you might think, is this really exploitable? Hasn't black got the defensive resource to handle d6? Well, I'll show you an example with bishop b6. This makes it a nasty pin actually. A relative pin has gone up a level if the rook is on d7, and then white can play like this. And when white plays c5, it has a devastating effect. For example, like this is crushing and crashing through. And if a takes instead, then c5 here, and bishop takes. It's horrible. So yeah, the d6 pawn could easily become a major issue in some lines. So we see queen f6 for the moment. Not knight takes e2. That knight is a kind of shield for the d6 pawn. We see rook ab1, h6, b4. The queenside pawn majority is being used, it seems. Queen h4, bishop f2, kicking the queen away. Queen e1, refusing point blank an exchange of queens. If white did exchange queens, it actually loses a significant amount of advantage if the queen had taken instead. There's not too much to play with here, actually. This position, it's only going to be a small edge for white. So the queen drops back to e1. We have king h7, rook d1, queen e7, a4. So using the kind of trump card over here, the queenside pawn majority, knight f4, knight takes, e takes, and things get super beautiful for me. This is why this game made an aesthetic impression on me. What white played here, can you guess? White to play here, if I give you 10 seconds, what would you play in this position? Okay, e5, it liberates that bishop finally. So the bishop without the counterpart is being celebrated now. It's official. D takes is played. If bishop takes, then bishop takes g6. This is going to be good for white. And there's a kind of, actually it's not the e pawn which is the problem, it's going to be the d pawn again. White can treble on the d pawn. That's going to be a big problem here, and white's going to have a big advantage there. So we have e5, d takes, and now, you know, white gives up the knight, which often helps. Giving up a dark square and bishop often helps a light square campaign, and this is a super beautiful light square campaign coming up, but not without yet another third super mysterious rook move, rook g1. Rook g1. Okay, if queen e4, this is also looking sensible. Queen e4, right? Battery. And okay, white does seem to have an edge there as well. But rook g1 was inserted here. Rook c7. If bishop f6, then queen e4 seems sensible. For example, like this, and white's advantage is nice. For example, b5, that queenside pawn majority is translated here, it doesn't matter about the fragmentation, into b7 pressure with a big advantage. So anyway, rook c7 is played, and we have g4. This is a light square campaign being carried out here. Black played e5. If f takes, then there's going to be pressure and trouble on g6. So black really didn't welcome g6 problems. And a big advantage for white. So black just allowed that to stand without any en passant. So we have e5, queen e4, so marvellous pieces on light squares, queen f6, c5, marvellous queenside pawn majority, and this orchestra is in progress. You know, this is like Stoofvlees is the orchestra on both sides of the board. You know, rook g8, a5. This fixes down this structure, which is light square target, light square food for the bishop later maybe. Queen c6. If king h8, then, you know, taking here is going to be good for white. For example, like this, it's still a big advantage for white. So we have queen c6, and now h4. White doesn't care about the queens coming off. Queens come off, and you see a lot of the engine games, often that is a prelude to eventually the game being drawn, and there have been a lot of draws in TCEC, but often the queens are taken off by the engine playing black. But is it the case here that this is drawish? It is opposite coloured bishops, but what a magnificent central light square bishop is this. This is the conductor of the orchestra here, sitting in the middle of the board, conducting the queen side and the king side. We have king h8. If bishop f8, then h5, for example like this, hg with a big advantage. So king h8, and now that pawn goes, okay, so we are back to 6 pawns each. 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. However, look at this, h5. Look at the contrast. White at least has pawns on dark squares which complement the bishop on this side of the board, but this is the side of the board where the bishop wants to eat the opponent's pawns as well, so they're helping fix the food is not going to run away of the light square bishop on the queen side. On the king side there's no food anyway to be had. There's a pawn on dark square, so maybe we can qualify a kind of bishop and pawn strategy. Sometimes those are confusing, those generalizations you might have heard. So what are we saying here? We're saying maybe it's okay to have pawns on the same colour of the bishop, on the side of the board where there's no pawns to eat. On the side of the pawn, on the side of the pawn, on the side of the board where you've got pawns to eat, it's okay to have your pawns on the other colour of the bishop. If they're fixing the food, it's not going to run away for your light square bishop. Anyway, just remember the details of this concrete example and generalise from that, because what we're about to see is absolutely wonderful. So we see rook g2 here, and actually for the record it doesn't even matter about bishop f2 to e3. It turns out even if this invasive bishop came here, white would still be better. For example, like this, white just works away around that bishop, and it doesn't actually matter for the record. But this is probably, you know, an upgrade to the position to avoid that bishop going to e3. Here the bishop, you know, goes back into its own territory. Shooed away. So rook e1, bishop f6, king g1, rook d8, rook d2, king g7. The king comes to a light square and another light square, and the rook goes to f1, and now bishop e7, and now the bishop comes back. It's ready to orchestrate here again. We see rook g8, rook c2. The queen side actions seem to be in action. King d3, a lovely blockade of that pawn, d4 pawn, bishop h4. This is reminiscent of Michael Adams playing against Hydra in the classic match where he only drew one game, but he blockaded with his king a central pawn. He got a lot of money just for that draw though. So rook fc1, bishop f6, and now the queenside action starts with c6. So yes, the king is supporting c2 as well as the bishop if needed. What a beautiful position to be in here, with these pawns on the opposite colour of the bishop, fixing down the food. We have here b takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. This is just crushing. This a6 pawn is a fatal flaw in black's position. If it goes, there are two connected passed pawns. Rook b8, rook b6. Black dare not take on b6, because if black takes, black didn't. Black played rook c8. But if black took, then this is too much to bear. The king is ready to go into the position like this as an example. And for example, this is g5 would be a winning pass pawn over there. So we have actually rook c8. And now rook takes a6 spells disaster for black. Two connected pass pawns. Check, and here black actually resigned without carrying on here. This looks absolutely crushing with these two connected pass pawns over here and this bishop on e4. Actually, for those curious, given that black has rook c3, let's see an example here. Continuation, b5 check, king d2. There is bishop b4, but white can actually play a6, ignoring these seemingly dangerous discover check, because white wants to play like this and get the king to b2. And actually there's a problem here. Even if black blockades on the queen side, white is ready to create another pass pawn on the king side. So the orchestration is actually lovely to see in this fictional continuation. So a pass pawn generated here, and it's all too much for the two black pieces to handle. For example, like this. Or there's actually two winning moves, which is cute here, either b6 or h7. b6 will do, for example, like this, and then here b7 and then b8 queening with a big advantage. Or there was h7 if white wants to break through on this side with a pass pawn. Then rook c6, that protects the h7 pawn and threatens like things like rook c8, and as well as the bishop. So this is just hopeless for black. What can black do? If rook h2, then king b3, then b6 there. It's all pretty crushing stuff. So yeah, I'll take you back. So fun stuff there. I'll take you back to the game end position though. So a really remarkable and aesthetically pleasing game. Okay, I just thought it was wonderful what happened in this game. So when I concretely came to have a look at this game, there are some deeply mysterious rook moves, which shows there's another string to Stoofvlees' bow when it comes to bishops and weaknesses in general, that it point blank refuses sometimes to play pawn moves which might be popular in the human over the board world, but it doesn't like committing to weaknesses, like most engines actually don't like committing to any permanent weaknesses nowadays, most strong engines. And that bishop without the counterpart was like orchestrating the board on the queen side and the king side. So it made a great impression on me. I wonder what impression it made on you this game. Okay. Follow the action at tsec-chess.com. If you want to check out my latest course, Kingscrusher TV/Opening Tango. So I do touch on weakness provocation and part of that I do emphasize trying to encourage your opponent's pawns on a certain colour. If you wanted to create dark square weaknesses, you want lots of pawns on light squares, as many as you can get in general. You'd want a bonus points for the king being on the tail end of a colour complex or other goodies. So I talk about some philosophical ideas, but this mysterious rook move business in this game, is a refusal to give in to create weaknesses unnecessarily. There's the bit.ly/Leela Chess playlist, Kingscrusher TV/Discord, and if you want to invite me for a game at Chess World 5 Days Move, register at bit.ly/chessworld. I'll be able to invite you for a game soon after. Comments, questions, like, shares, subscribes with the notification bell, always appreciated. Thanks very much.